people think if you're taking this on? This is not like building a sailboat or whatever.
Well, the State Mental Institution, Medical Lake, it's fairly close. I think several people think I belong there. Stage, we have 7 cars here, and it's basically half of a North Coast Limited. We have 2 Vistadome coaches, and this car we're in right now is the Slumber Coach. We have a Traveler's Rest Lounge, which was probably the most unique lounge on any railroad. We have a Lewis and Clark Traveler's Rest Lounge. Like I say, we have the Mount St. Helens Club Lounge, which was patterned after a Northern Pacific car, but actually used on the SPNS. The SPNS provided the connection from Pasco, Washington to Portland for passengers that were going to Portland instead of Seattle. And then the other 2 cars we have, which are among the rarest cars, are the 2 Vistadome Sleepers. All told, there were only 15 of those built, and the Northern Pacific had 11, and today the 2 we have are the only 2 that still exist in original configuration.
Some of the real difficult items that you've been able to pick up, you've actually gotten hold of.
Well, that would be, I guess I'd have to really think about that for a while to think what some of the things were. The main thing we've tried to put back is furniture and things that were actually correct for the era, and it's been hard to find the exact piece. So we've had to find, like in this car has chairs actually off the Chicago Northwestern. We've got some off the Rio Grande, but they're correct for the era. So we feel once that they're back on the car that the average person will accept them as being original. Hardware for doors has been a hard thing to find. In the 6 cars that are here, there's no less than about 12 different styles of hardware just for doors. And the average person that's rebuilding a car today doesn't care about keeping it original, so they'll just put on something that's more contemporary. We're trying to put back the original, like I say, door handles and hinges and everything, so that when you're aboard the car that you'll realize that this is the way the car looked when it was built.
I don't think there's any question, but with the Great Northern and Northern Pacific and the Burlington had some of the premier passenger trains. The North Coast Limited and the Great Northern's Empire Builder and the Zephyrs on the Burlington were all well equipped. The equipment was really high quality, etc. When Amtrak came along, we weren't necessarily happy with Amtrak, but it did relieve us of a lot of the expense. They didn't fully compensate the railroads for using the trackage at that time, but it was a release of a very substantial amount of the cost of operations. They did take from all of our lines the railroads that got to be Burlington Northern, and they took our best equipment and spread it over the rest of the country. And we became, actually downgraded the trains that were operating on the BN very substantially, because the new domes and the new coaches and superliners, and all of those went someplace else. In many cases, people didn't understand that. They thought that it was the Northern Pacific or the Great Northern, or in the case of Burlington Northern, that was making the move on downgrading this equipment, but that's not the case. Amtrak was making these moves.
What sort of money do you have to pay for a car?
Oh, the cars have all varied. It's a different price for each one, of course, and kind of the going price now has been from $15,000 to $50,000 for a car in this condition. And once they're restored, they'll be worth considerable more. Some are worth more than that already just because of their rarity.
How about for power?
At this time, we're kind of looking for a couple of F units, which were correct for the train at that time. We'd like to restore a couple of the proper units to go with it. Otherwise, if we don't, we hope to just have leased units of some type that are correct for the era. So,
how much time do you have to put into this project?
I really haven't kept track of the time. It's been kind of mind-boggling, really. I usually try and work on it 2 or 3 days a week at least, and sometimes more, and I think sometimes 25 hours a day. So.
Yeah, when did you get the first car?
The first car came in 1993, and the last car came last year in 1998, and we'll have one more car coming this year, hopefully.
So the obvious question here is, what kind of person would take on such a task as Mike Gelhaus has taken on, reassembling one of the most famous trains of the golden era of streamline railroading, and that's the Northern Pacific's North Coast Limited passenger train, which ran from Chicago to Seattle, Washington. Mike was a big NP fan, of course. He joined the Northern Pacific after getting out of school. He then became a locomotive engineer as the NP merged into the Burlington Northern. And he was a man of modest means. He had a simple house. He lived on an engineer's salary and saved his money in scrimps so he could buy these cars. So it's an incredible story. He was an incredible person, and one of the most interesting people I've ever known. Tremendously resourceful and tremendously committed to this task. Mike and I traded correspondence over time, and I'm going to include some of this with here in the video, and I'm going to run it by very quickly. You can hit the pause button if you want to stop and look at some of this. The first car we'll look at is the slumber coach. Now, Mike sent a note with his Christmas card in 1999, which covers the slumber coach history. And there's also a very interesting paragraph on the back here in which he describes seeing his first slumber coach as a boy of 10 when it was brand new. The slumber coach was brand new to the Northern Pacific, and it came to his town, and his family took a tour of it. The slumber coach was interesting in that it was a sleeper. It had a central aisleway, whereas all the other sleeper cars on the Northern Pacific had an aisleway off to the side of the car so they could provide more room for the sleeper units in that car. But the slumber coach had a central aisleway, and I don't know how wide that car was, but it couldn't have been more than 10.5 feet wide. So if you take out 6 inches for walls, which is probably not enough, you have 2 exterior walls plus the 2 aisleway halls, and 6 inches probably wouldn't do that. But then if you take out probably 3 feet, say, for an aisleway, because that has to be big because you've got people hauling luggage through there, that leaves you 7 feet. So with units, with rooms on both sides of the aisle, you have rooms that are only, 3.5 feet wide, and each one of those rooms were equipped with a toilet, a sink, a mirror, and a bed. So they were noted as being very ingenious in their construction. I don't have photos of the rooms in the slumber coach. Mike had a slumber coach. It was the original Loch Ness from the Northern Pacific. But in his book, which I always highly recommend, Bill Kubler has lots of photos that apparently came from the Northern Pacific corporate archives showing the various rooms. Excellent photos of those.
A lot of those glass on those dome cars are going to have to be replaced.
It's going to be a big job. And
are they glass or plexiglass or what?
they're plexiglass. Amtrak replaced it, so it's all going to have to be back, replaced to glass again. It's a mess. It's all fogged. It's degenerated. It's all like milk
under
glass.
the sun.
Yeah. And then
How
all the
did they
years.
keep them from doing that in the old days?
Well,
Did they ever keep
used
it
to be
done?
glass.
I see.
Yeah,
Well,
so Amtrak replaced it with plastic, and then all the years of washing it with detergent and stuff that broke down the plastic. And I never come down here. I come down thinking, well, today we're going to do this, and I come down here and discover something that you didn't even plan on. The tarps come off, or something's happened. It's starting to leak in a new place. And
Mike kept his cars in the old Northern Pacific train yard just outside of Spokane, which was an especially important place back in the days of steam. When I would go through there after Mike passed away, I would always drive up on a bridge and look over there to see if the cars had been removed or not, and see if the tarps were on them. I took this photo after his passing, and I saw that the tarps had been blown off the domes, and they would obviously be leaking rain into the cars themselves and creating a huge amount of damage. So it was that point I knew that it was okay if the cars would go. Having obtained day coaches and sleepers and domes, Mike was hot on the trail to find a dining car and asked me to look at 2 dining cars for his possible acquisition. The first of those cars was located in Willits, California, which is located in the Northern California Redwoods. and the car had been stranded. There had been a rail washout of the track getting into Willits, and I guess nobody thought that it would be worth spending the money to repair the tracks, and so the car was just stranded there, which I guess was okay because the car was not in very good shape and missing quite a bit. The second car was XNP Diner number 454, which was in Colton, California, and I have pictures of that. First, we'll look at what the car looked like when it was in service with the Northern Pacific. That car was missing a few things, but not too much. Was in quite a state of disassembly, although many of the parts, especially those that are difficult to find, were located somewhere around the car. I figured it'd probably take two guys, maybe 2 weeks to get that car back into a functioning food service. You'd have to build tables, and you'd have to get the chairs, and then you would, the tables are always covered with fine linen tablecloths, so you wouldn't have to get very fancy there. You'd have to get silver service. NPI's had wonderful silver service and fine china. Clean up the kitchen, get the kitchen operational again, fill up the propane tanks, and so wouldn't have taken that much work. Following Mike's passing in 2014, his cars were sold to 3 different parties, and of course his vision for a reassembled and operating North Coast Limited were never realized. Would that ever happen in the future? Well, there's a possibility of it. I think those cars have gone to good homes. They probably going to be restored. Perhaps someday somebody with financial wherewithal will get them reassembled and have a North Coast Limited out there. The value of that train would be much, much more, much greater than the sum of the value of the cars as taken by themselves. Such a train would obviously be a national treasure. Can you imagine a streamlined train from the golden age of railroading still operating? I know the Orient Express in Europe charges about $5,000 per room for 2 people for a 24-hour trip from London to Venice, Italy. So there can be money in cruise trains. You could run that car for 3 months up in the Northwest, where you could stop and provide tours to Yellowstone Park, and stop in Missoula up and have tours into Glacier Park and so on. So who knows? I would hope, we'll just hope someday that happens again, and Mike's dream will finally be fulfilled. As for Mike Gelhaus himself, I'll always hold him in awe for having the guts and determination to roll up his sleeves and go to work on his vision for a future North Coast Limited. For anyone, it would be a seemingly impossible task, no matter what their financial resources. Who else would have taken on such a project? If you're going to send a person out to accomplish this kind of task, you'd want to pick Mike Gelhaus. Mike was well liked and well connected in his railroad circles, and when it came to the history, construction, detailing, and restoration of Northern Pacific passenger cars, he very likely knew more than anyone else in the world. He knew where to source the parts, how to get the work done, and do it on a slim budget. Mike made enormous progress on making his dream a reality. Had he been given more time and a financial sponsor, anyone who knew Mike would have never bet against the North Coast Limited once again carrying happy travelers through world-class scenery. I wanted to get Mike's story published as he set a very important example for the rest of us, and it's simply this. Through his work, Mike let each of us know that when we become passionate, there is little that we, by ourselves, cannot accomplish. So think bigger, stay safe, be kind to your neighbor, and I'll see you in the next episode.